this is Brooke again, and this week's Ask Livestrong is about colonoscopies. Thanks very much for submitting your ideas and your questions. And so this week we have 4 questions. The first one comes from Jennifer, and here we have Andy Miller, and he is Executive Vice President of Mission at the Foundation and is trained in health education, so he's the guy to go to for that. So Jennifer wants to know at which age you should get screened and how often.
Yep. That's really easy. For someone who's at average risk for colon cancer, the recommendations right now are pretty standard. At age 50, someone should begin having colonoscopies, and there are a number of tests that you can choose from. And depending upon the physician that you go to and the conversation you have with that physician, you may choose any number of these tests. But depending on which one you choose could depend on how frequently you need to have the test. So for example, if you choose a screening colonoscopy, you would want to have that repeated at least every 10 years. Now if the first colonoscopy comes back with findings of cancerous or precancerous lesions, then you would need to be screened probably more frequently on future colonoscopies. If you choose another method like flexible sigmoidoscopy or double contrast barium enema or one of the newer CT colonographies, those would likely have to be repeated every 5 years. And then one of the most prevalent tests is the fecal occult blood test, and that should be repeated every year if you choose to be screened via that method.
Okay, great. So some of the risk factors, you're talking about the average risk. What are the risk factors for colon cancer?
So they would be lumped into 2 groups. There are those risk factors that you really can't do anything about, such as age. As you increase in age, your risk for colon cancer goes up. Your racial ethnic background, there's some evidence that African Americans suffer disproportionately from colon cancer as opposed to other racial ethnic groups. Whether or not you have a family history of colon cancer, or if you personally have a history of colon polyps or cancerous lesions in the colon. And then there is a whole host of inherited genetic disorders that if you have one of those, it can significantly increase your risk for colon cancer. So anyone who falls into those increased risk categories need to talk to their physician about more frequent screening and what's right for them. Fortunately, there are a whole host of other risk factors that are more lifestyle related, and these are things that you can do something about. Things like smoking and the types of diet that you have. If your diet is higher in red meat as opposed to other meats and vegetables, you're at an increased risk for colon cancer. Obesity, physical activity level, heavy alcohol use, if you have type 2 diabetes, all of these things are lifestyle related risk factors that if you take the proper steps, you can reduce your risk significantly.
Okay, great. The number 1 question that came up and lots of stir online about was the preparation before the test. Apparently it is fairly unpleasant, and it's one of the main barriers for people to actually take have a colonoscopy. So let's get it all out there and talk about the preparations before the actual test.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. A lot of people report that the prep is much more difficult than the colonoscopy itself, and that's usually because people choose to be sedated during the procedure itself. So they may be in a twilight state, they may go to sleep, they may not even remember the procedure at all, but they will remember the prep because it has to be done over a 24-hour period prior to going to the physician to actually have the screening done. So what will happen is you will be given a solution that you will have to ingest over the next 24 hours, and the goal is to have your colon as clean as possible so as to give the physician the best look that he or she can have at your colon so that they can identify and remove any polyps or anything that looks suspicious. So to that end, given that your colon has to be clean, everything has to come out. So the recommendation is you be at home, close to the toilet, if not on the toilet, for most of the day. And for many people, that's, if not uncomfortable, fairly inconvenient. But I will say that you don't want to shortchange the process because going through it um, and not following instructions, and going to the physician's office, having your colon inflated, doing the procedure, and then having to have the procedure stopped because there's too much fecal matter to actually examine the entire colon, means you have to go back and do the whole thing over again. So you really want to follow your doctor's instructions as to how to accurately prepare for the test so that you can give them the best look possible. And there are also a few things that you should avoid in the days leading up to a colonoscopy as well. So you want to avoid any aspirin or ibuprofen for about 7 days prior to the test. No, vitamin C above 250 milligrams for about 3 days prior to the test, and no red meat 3 days prior to the test. If you do all of those things and follow the instructions on the prep, and then contact your doctor if you have any problems during the prep period, you should be good and give your physician the best look at your colon possible.
Great. And the last question comes from Joe on Facebook. Are at-home tests as good as, or can use it in place of the colonoscopy?
Yeah. This is an example where you would almost think the opposite to be true, that an at-home test wouldn't be as accurate or as desirable as a test in your physician's office. But what they're referring to is what's called a fecal occult blood test, or FOBT. And what you're trying to do with that test is look for blood in the fecal matter, because polyps in the colon actually bleed. The problem is they don't bleed consistently. They may bleed intermittently. So if you take one sample in the physician's office, if there's no blood in that sample, it may just be that the polyps in your colon weren't bleeding at that time. So the at-home test allows you to take a number of samples over a number of consecutive bowel movements, so you really do get an increased chance of detecting any hidden blood if it is there. So the at-home test, I think the American Cancer Society recommends that you want to take at least 6 samples from at least 3 consecutive bowel movements to really get the best chance of detecting any hidden blood. But the tests, what we find, are fairly accurate. In fact, there was one study that was done not too long ago that looked at FOBTs that were taken home, and when they detected occult blood, they were 60% accurate when confirmed with a follow-on colonoscopy. Now, if someone took a single sample via digital rectal exam in the doctor's office, those only had a 26.5% accuracy when followed up with a confirmatory colonoscopy. So as you can see, the more samples you can take, the more likely it is to be accurate in detecting potential polyps or cancerous or precancerous lesions.
Okay, so we all know that this is not the most pleasant subject, but I'm glad that you brought it up, and I'm glad that you gave us your questions. And basically, it's not pleasant, but you got to do it, and it'll help catch cancer a lot earlier than you would if you didn't do it.
And I will say that this is one of the cancers where we're really fortunate to have a number of very reliable, highly accurate screening tests. And if we could get everyone screened who's eligible to be screened and have them screened as frequently as is recommended, we could virtually eliminate colorectal cancer. The problem is there are many people who choose not to do it for a whole host of reasons, because it's uncomfortable, it's embarrassing, they just want to put it off, they don't want to think about it. There's no family risk factors, but again, most people who are diagnosed with colorectal cancer, there are no family risk factors, there are no inherited risk factors. So it's important for everyone at average risk to be screened as recommended, and if they were, the beautiful thing about a colonoscopy is it can detect and treat at the same test. You don't always have to have a follow-on procedure unless a more advanced cancer is found. But if we can remove polyps, we can stop colorectal cancer.
That's awesome. Thank you very much.